By the way, I'm a Chicago boy, born and raised. Honestly, this is, I don't get back here very much, but it's always a joy to come home. There's something about the Midwest, and I don't know, just a certain inherent honesty, shoot from the hip kind of way that we Midwesterners, we Chicagoans, and I include you, even if you're from Wheaton, to the way we go about doing things. It's an admirable quality, and I think it's something which I think we should, and rightfully so, be proud of, and that's our Midwestern heritage, our hog butcher of the world, stacker of wheat. I met Sandberg several times when I was a student at the University of Illinois, and always a great admirer. Maybe some of that has influenced my writing, who knows. Anyway, you heard about the movie, and the movie is really taking off. And it's opening up doors that I never expected would be opening so wide for me at this stage of my writing career. This is my 11th book, and you're looking at a guy that is going to be 70 years old this December. Hard to believe, isn't it? And so it's kind of interesting for me to be launched finally in my career. I'm just being discovered after working for 35 years, but that's okay. That's okay. Okay, tonight, let me just say a little bit more about Saturday. Saturday is a more visual as well as talking experience. This is a talking experience. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to tell you some stuff, and you're going to respond, I'm sure, with questions to me afterwards. But this is talking. Saturday's visual and talking. So you're going to see pictures. You're going to see ideas displayed in both a visual and an auditory way. So some of the ideas which can only conjure up possible illusions or even erroneous thoughts in your mind will, I hope, be clarified when you see the presentation. I tend to go a little bit overboard with PowerPoint. I like to use a lot. I do animations. I was doing a lot of sound for a while, but then people got distracted. They say, I can't hear you, and don't play the music so loud. I gotta, and the music was part of what I was trying to portray, but never mind. So I've cut the music out. It'll just be, it'll be silent pictures and with this windbag talking. So that'll be all. Okay, so and that'll be more about what is the yoga of time travel, the whole spectrum of it for a large set. And it's a fairly long workshop. It's going to be morning and afternoon. I mean, not long in the sense you're going to feel long. You're going to be enlivened by it. The word long could have a negative connotation. Okay. Tonight, I want to talk about the spiritual dimension of all this. What does it mean? What does it mean to have a spiritual dimension? So first, let me begin with a kind of quotation. One day, Sakyamuni Buddha was involved with a discussion with his monks. And he said to them, "Verily, there is a realm where there is neither the solid nor the fluid, neither heat nor motion, neither this world or any world, neither sun nor moon or stars. There is, O monks, an unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unformed. If," he says, "if there were not this unborn, this unoriginated, this uncreated, and this unformed, escape from this world of the born, the originated, the created, and the formed would not be possible." Now, what the heck was the Buddha talking about? We read about this stuff, we go, huh? What could that possibly mean? Well, I want to tell you something. Physicists today have discovered what that means. And it's very exciting because it's leading into a whole direction of thought that prior to the discoveries of the turn of the 20th century, the discoveries of quantum physics and Einsteinian relativity and that kind of stuff, prior to that time, would have been considered fantasy, not even worthy of any serious consideration. Of course, spiritual disciplines talk about such things maybe, but who really has a gut level understanding of what the heck that means? My job is to, first of all, find out what that means, and second of all, to try to explain it the best way I know how. What I would call that, if I gave it a title, would be aside from the yoga of time travel, of course, would be the physics of Shiva, the god of time. Now, let me give you a clue about this realm that I'm talking about. Scientifically, medically, physiologically, neurophysiologically, we have looked inside of your body. We've gone into every orifice we can find. Orifice, you know what that word means? Okay, if you don't, it's hole. Okay, every orifice in your body. And we have looked and explored and searched and done tests and research, and the conclusion was that in spite of all of the great measuring that we're able to accomplish in this area of the body, there is nothing inside of you, not even a smidgen, not even a slight hint, not a smell, not a taste, not a feeling, nada, nothing inside of you that is called an I. And yet, every one of you, quote unquote, seems to know what the heck you're talking about when you say I. What the heck are you talking about? There's no objective I present. There's nothing in there that we can say, it's right there. It's in the pineal gland. Or if you're a young male teenager, in the penis gland. But whatever, what we had, it's not there. We just can't find it. So what is it? What are we talking about? It has many names. In German, it's ich. In French, it's je. In English, it's I. In Russia, it's ya. In Japanese, one of the translations is watashi. What is that? Spanish, yo. What are we talking about? If we begin to inquire and begin to realize that it's not something that's made of matter, it's not material, there's no I present, then how can we talk about anything having to do that has a reference to that I? I see the star. I hear the voice. I smell the flower. I taste the food. What are we talking about? All of these objective experiences, that is, things which we can relate to the objective world through our five senses, all are clustered around this invisible I-ness, Your Highness, and there ain't nothing there. The emperor not only has no clothes, he has no body either. So what is going on? Well, that's an interesting question, and that is part and parcel of what the yoga of time travel is really all about. It's if the I, and here I'll throw this out to you and you can play with it for a moment. If this conceptual I is not real, then it's got to be something which is imaginal, something which we imagine, something we create from the mind in some way. Okay, we can talk about whether the mind is real either, but let's just stay with this for a moment. Let me use some structure, even though I may throw it away later on. If we say that, then it's conceptual, then that means that it's subject to change. I mean, this may be hard to change because it seems to be pretty solid. Later on, we'll find out what that solidity is all about. But right now, I'll take it for granted it's solid. It doesn't seem to be subject to much change. But the I is not even solid. So what can it mean? Is it changeable? Well, if it is changeable, what would happen if we began to cultivate, to instigate, to promulgate, to propagate, to get out there the idea that let's start changing what we mean by our I and see what kind of universe we can create? Is it possible that things could change if we begin to change the I? Not only that, suppose we become aware of how we can use this I, change it, modify it, make it bigger, make it smaller, see where it gets caught in traps, see where it is allowed to get free, see how it changes, and begin to possibly exercise a kind of, I won't use the word control, but let's say a resonance with. What could we learn from that? From my understanding of this, and from the teachings of ancient Indian philosophy, particularly those of Patanjali, who wrote something called the Yoga Sutras, this is not only a question worth considering, it is the only question worth considering. It is the question. It is the centerpiece of all yogic philosophy. It is the central piece of all spirituality. It is the only thing we really can deal with in our quest for spiritual resonance with God, with Spirit, with your wife or your husband, or George Bush or John Kerry. I don't care who you're trying to resonate with, but it's only through that we can find this kind of thing that we're talking about. It also turns out, according to Patanjali and some of the teachings, and from some of the work and research work that I've now done, which now includes something we call quantum physics, which I'll tell you more about in a little while. It now appears that it is very intimately connected with time itself. Now, this is something that may sound new, but it actually turns out to be as old as the teachings of Patanjali, which goes back 2,500 years. It goes back 500 years before the birth of Christ. So changing all that stuff, doing all of that, changing yourself, getting into a new sense of I, really requires some work. It's not something that is particularly easy to do. Now, at this point, I usually sing a song. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to sing it, because it sort of fits in. You see, one of the things that happens to us is that life gets us down. And what is the meaning of that? What is that our mental process that we are, let's say, infected by, contagious to, that brings us down, makes us depressed, makes us sad, brings us to a point of maybe even despair? So one philosopher that had something to say about this is an old philosopher, also a movie maker. His name is Monty Python. And he goes like this: whenever life gets you down, Mrs. Brown, and things seem hard or tough, and people are stupid, obnoxious, or daft, and you feel that you've had quite enough, just remember that you're standing on a planet that's evolving and revolving at 900 miles an hour. It's orbiting at 90 miles a second, so it's reckoned. The sun, which is the source of all our power, the sun and you and me and all the stars that we can see, are moving at 1,000,000 miles a day in an outer spiral arm at 40,000 miles an hour of a galaxy we call the Milky Way. Our galaxy itself contains 100 billion stars. It's 100,000 light years side to side. It bulges in the middle, 6,000 light years thick, but out by us it's just 3,000 light years wide. We're 30,000 light years from galactic central point. We go around every 200 million years, and our galaxy is only one of millions and billions in this amazing and expanding universe. The universe itself just keeps on expanding and expanding in all the directions it can whiz. As fast as it can go, the speed of light, 12 million miles a minute. That's the fastest speed there is. So remember, when you're feeling very down, very small and insecure, how amazingly unlikely is your birth. And pray that there is intelligent life somewhere out in this abstract space that the Buddha talks about, because it's craziness down here on earth. Thank you. All the serious talk, we have to have a little tomfoolery once in a while. Well, time and mind are seemingly different categories of things, but they may be more related than we have commonly thought. Time travel, the ability to move through time, seems to be something that is either a fantasy, science fiction, or something that you have to even think about for a while to understand what it could possibly mean, because there are many different forms that it can take. It seems that what would that have to do with mind, or any of the things that I've talked about up to now? Well, it turns out that yoga is a kind of time travel that involves the mind. And when one learns more about what the practice of yoga is what one is doing, one finds there is a process that you're undergoing in doing yoga, which I will, in the workshop, explain more, but tell you a little bit about now. That's a process that I call focusing and defocusing. And I'll relate to you why that's important and what that has to do with time travel in just a few moments. But it's that process that is very much involved in the practices of yoga, and particularly in mind yoga, yoga where you're using your spiritual thinking, heart-mind process. So it will help us to realize, when we go a little deeper, how this connection between mind and time arises and how this can lead to time travel. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the ancient texts, because this will give you a hint and tell you a little bit about why I brought up the subject of going down, feeling down. In a work which is known as the Bhagavad Gita, how many of you know about the Bhagavad Gita? Oh, most of you, good. This is Theosophical Society, they know about the Bhagavad Gita. Okay. There's a famous story that's going on. The story of Krishna and Arjuna. You know the story. Here's what's going on. Arjuna is, and I'm giving you a nutshell version of the story. Arjuna has a battle to fight. And not just any old battle, but he's got to fight against people he knows, neighbors, cousins, maybe brothers and sisters. I don't remember all the families that he has to fight against. And he's really, being a spiritual guy, he's kind of worried about it. So one night, he's having a dialogue with his charioteer, the guy that controls the horses when he rides in the back and throws the sword, or whatever these guys do in those bloody battles. And his charioteer is named Krishna. And Arjuna doesn't realize that this Krishna, who's his charioteer, is also the Krishna. So he's having a conversation, saying he's worried about this, he doesn't know what to do, and And what should he do? And Krishna says something to him which is really perplexing. It's kind of, huh? He says, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Why not? He says, because they're already dead. How can they already be dead? I'm going to be fighting them tomorrow. No, he says, from my point of view, they're long gone. Well, what point of view is that they would be long gone? And then Krishna says this, time, I am. The great destroyer of the worlds. And even without you, even if you don't go to battle with these people, all these people here, all the fighters who take positions on both sides of this war, will be engaged in destroying and will be gone. So Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna that there's another point of view to take on the struggle of humankind. Not the struggle, not the point of view of a person involved in the struggle, although not saying you shouldn't get involved in the struggle, but there's another point of view, a bigger, a broader, a more spiritual point of view. And that broader point of view is timeless. And by timeless, he means the whole drama of time is just seen as a great theater. Death is not as frightening from this point of view. Death is a kind of change of cosmic address, much like an actor who appears on a stage for a short time, plays a role either as a devastating nasty or a marvelous hero or a heroine, a beauty queen, a grandmother, a child. I mean, all the different roles that we've seen many movie stars go through. And yet, the next lifetime around, it's just another set of roles, just like changing parts. And that when one understands that, when one takes that point of view of understanding that, it's not frightening anymore. Death is just a change of parts. And once you practice your spirituality with that understanding, it then becomes a very different game, this thing we call life. So, Gita says that. Spirituality says that. Now what about quantum physics? Where does this timeless, spaceless realm come from in the realm of quantum physics? And why would I even be interested in it, being trained as a quantum physicist? Well, first of all, let me say a little bit more about spirituality, and then I'm going to tell you about the quantum physics. This is an infinite, unchanging reality. And that's almost an oxymoron. I mean, it's a contradiction almost. And this unchanging reality that we're talking about is hidden. This is an interesting point, always contained in all the deep spiritual teachings. It's hidden. It's not obvious. It's hidden. And we want to find out, why is it hidden? Why can't we see it? I'm going to tell you. Behind the illusion of ceaseless change. In other words, it looks like he's moving, but from another point of view, that's frozen in block time. There's no movement. It's hidden. So we see it as change. And this infinite, unchanging reality, this core, is alive, it's present, it can be known, and yet it's at the core of every single one of us. We all know this core. It is us. It's the essential core of our being. It's so essential and so profound that we've made it the simplest thing we can think of. We call it, guess what? What do you think we call it? I. We just call it I. Think about this for a moment. That I, it has the trappings possibly of now an older body, a younger body, a female body, a male body, a young child, now a teenager, now an adult, now a grandmother. But think about that I for a moment, and you realize that I, that thing you call I, has been the same ever since you can remember it. Has it changed? You look in the mirror and you say, the body. And you look at the body and you say, that's how that I has changed. And I've changed. But you haven't changed. Because you can't change that. It doesn't change. It's the same I. And if you think about it, if you remember it, if you cultivate yourself to remember it, you'll see that that ceaseless I is very present. It is your essential core. You give it a name that's so simple that you think it I. And usually what you mean by that is my body. But it ain't your body. Because your body is undergoing what appears to be change. And it appears to be something going on. From this kind of point of view, from this spiritual point of view, there's only one purpose to life. Only one. You think, oh my God, only one. I thought your purpose of life was to get married, have children, make a lot of money, or get the next part in a play, become the president of the CIA, all that ba-da-do, ba-da-da that you say. Whatever it is, to be bigger and better or smaller and less than, whatever it is that your hopes, that ain't it. The one purpose, the main purpose, according to this kind of thinking, is to experience this one reality, to discover this one reality, to become present in this one reality. So you see what the point is, to discover that. Now, when you begin to discover that, and I'm going to come into quantum physics in a moment, but I'm just going to get the spirit. This is the spiritual dimension we're talking about, right? That's what this talk is titled. When you begin to discover this, you begin to recognize something which is very powerful within, that is your immortal nature, that you are forever. So death no longer holds terror for you. Yeah, we all go through it, and we have our night sweats, and I do too. Sometimes I think, oh my God, I'm going to die. Then I think, what the hell's that? That's just a thought. You know? I think about the Dalai Lama. I met him. I was in Dharamsala and I met him, and he told this story. People were asking him, well, why do you meditate every day? He said, well, I meditate 7 times a day, 7 or 8 hours every day, and I do this every day. Well, why? What do you do this for? He says, well, it takes me to this deeper, unoriginated, unborn, what the Buddha was talking about. It takes me to that place. And that's why I do it, because when death comes, it'll be good to be able to know that place. So in a certain sense, I meditate every day is the practice of my own death. He says, when other people joke with me or ask me in a jokingly way, what am I doing? I said, I'm dying 7 times a week, 7 times a day. All right, now, given that that's true, maybe you don't believe it, I don't care. Given that that's true, given that it's possible, given that it's true, then what the heck is going on? Why is it invisible? Why can't we see it? What is hiding it from us? What is all that? And the answer is simple, and it's also profound. It's something we construct. It's something that we create. And in the creation of that one thing, something else gets created alongside of it. And this is where the quantum physics comes in. And this is what makes it very, very interesting. With the creation of that one thing, which we give a label to, we call it, can you guess what you call it? What do you think we call it? As an objective name. I'll give you a hint. Freud. Ego. We give a name to it. Ego. Freud called it das Ich. How that came to be ego, I don't know. It means the I. Das Ich. Das Ich und das Es. The ego and the id. But that isn't what it was called in German. But we changed it. Anyway, this ego. This ego turns out to be a structure that we create for ourselves. And in so doing, something else gets created. Can you guess what else gets created with it? Time. That's true. Anything else? Guess. Come on, guess. All right, personality? Guess. Anything else? I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a hint. Okay. Anything but the ego. The other. Time. Space. Out there. Things. Labels. People. Objects. Atoms. Molecules. The universe. Stars. Everything else. Now you may think, nah, that can't be right. Those things are out there whether I'm here or not. That's what my professor taught me. That's got to be the right answer because he's an academic. He should know. He's got a PhD. He's piled higher and deep enough to know this stuff. I make fun of my own self because I'm piled higher and deeper like other PhDs in this room. So yes, well you see, that was the picture, and now I'm going to switch a little bit into the physics now so you can see how this melds together. This is the way I teach, by the way. I kind of like intuit where you're going. So here's how that works. Before quantum physics, we used to think that it's there, it's out there, whether I'm there or not. You're there, you're out there, whether I'm here or not. The chair, the table, the bears, they're here, whether I'm here or not. Okay? And we used to think that all things in the universe were just like that. The stars, the moon, the sun, the all out there, whether I'm here or not. And it seems so crazy, absolutely insane to say that they're not, that you wonder, what the hell is he talking about? How can that be so? How can he even say that? So in order to understand how I can say that, we have to begin to explore what it is that quantum physics, this discovery that was made at the turn of the 20th century that completely revolutionized our whole thinking about this stuff, what it has to say about all that stuff, the stuff we say that's out there. It raises the question, is there an out there out there? And the answer is only when you see it. Only when it's observed. Now, let me explain how that works. Because this is where you have to kind of put your thinking cap on a little bit, kind of loosen up some of the screws that have been tightened down that tell you, and this can't be right, so you can just make a little room, take your glass of everything you know that's right, and empty at least 1/8 of a cup out. If you can empty more, better. But give me 1/8 of a cup, of space, so I can put a little bit in that is not what you've got in that fluid that you call your brain. Okay. When we look, and I'll start off small, when we look at something like an atom or a particle inside of an atom, a subatomic particle, there are several classes of subatomic particles. There are 2 classes, but we won't get into the names. Let's just talk about one of them called an electron. You've heard the word electron before. You know the term from electronics. You know from some high school courses you may have learned that electricity is somehow the motion of electrons in wires of copper, which are making lights and all that sort of stuff. So you know that electrons are more or less thought to be particles of stuff, the little tiny particles with little negative electrical charges that run around, do the things that we call electricity. Well, that's fine. When there's a lot of them, like, billions upon billions upon billions of them, that's pretty much what they're like. It's kind of like watching from above a traffic pattern. If you look at all those cars, moving around, you find that indeed they start to satisfy certain restrictions of the boundary conditions on the road and whatever, and so traffic moves according to a well set of very basic classical mechanical, thermodynamic, hydrodynamic, fluid flow equations, which most traffic engineers know, and so they have ways in which they break up traffic by putting lights at certain places and so forth. Because they're not taking into consideration the drivers of those cars, they're just looking at them as just inanimate little things. When we start looking at electrons individually, we find that they don't look like little individual things anymore. They kind of get fuzzy. And the degree of fuzziness depends on how we go about looking at them. If we look at them with a certain amount of tolerance, which means we don't try to push them all in one small corner of space, they kind of spread out to fill the whole tolerant space we allow for them. They form a cloud. But if we start to narrow them down, narrow the cloud down, so we're looking in smaller spaces, then what happens to them is they will allow you to do that once in a while, but most of the time they go whip, and they're gone. They just seem to get some bubbly energy from somewhere and they just disappear. And then if you could narrow one down to the smallest gnat of a gnat of a gnat of a gnat's eyelash, I mean, really the billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a billionth, down to the what's called the really subatomic. We're talking about the scale upon which the universe is believed to have been created. I mean, like really down there. The particle gets so exploded that it actually has a violent amount of energy. In other words, what we're finding is that there's an inborn indeterminism associated with anything that we look for with any degree of restricted tolerance. The more tolerance we give it, the less explosive it is, the more we get in control of it, so long as we don't quite know what we're doing, where it is. You follow what I'm saying? This is called the uncertainty principle. Heisenberg was the guy that invented it. And it's a very strange principle. Given that, we wonder, well, how does it behave in an atom? What is it doing? Well, the old picture many of us have been taught, maybe in high school or wherever, is that the electron goes in an orbit about the nucleus. But it doesn't do that. It never did that. It doesn't follow any path at all, because if it was following a path, it would have to be located on that path. And if it's located on that path, it means that that particular path, which would be a line, would be a very thin line, let's say looking at it edgewise, going like this, you'd say, well, if you got it known pretty well that it's in this plane, but my God, that's really narrowing it down. How did you do that? Because that's the uncertainty principle would bulge it out. So when you start looking at all the uncertainty principle bulgings, the indeterminism, which is bubbling around this thing, it turns out to form of itself, one particle, a cloud. And in an atom, that cloud is so cloudy that it almost looks solid. And if you take other atoms, like the atoms that make up your body, like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, magnesium, beryllium, iron, all the stuff that makes up the DNA, all that stuff. And look at all that stuff, you see it's just a very cloudy-like stuff that only when you look for very restricted moments in which in the actual looking you destroy it, can you see it for a brief flash, and then it seems to be something solid, something there. But most of the time it's fuzzy. And when you start to theoretically use equations of physics to figure out what that stuff is doing at that level, you got to calculate it, try to see, make a model, because that's what physicists do. They make models theoretical models based upon the best mathematics that they can have to do these models with. When you try to make a model based upon the idea that the electron is in some kind of orbit, and not fuzzy, you can calculate the stability of such an atom as that, and it turns out to be highly unstable. In other words, here's what happens. If the electron were going in an orbit, it would start to radiate energy and spiral in, and be gobbled up by the nucleus. And eventually all the electrons would be gobbled up by the nuclei of their atoms, the respective atoms. And that means every one of you would shrink in size because you are, bulked out by the electron cloudiness. That's what makes atoms have the shapes they do. If every atom were to collapse in size by a factor of 100,000, which is how much they would collapse, you would be collapsed down to be the size of approximately a blood cell. And this blood cell would be talking to a bunch of blood cells sitting on fictitious chairs, which also would collapse. I hope the Earth would collapse to be about the size of maybe, 100,000 times smaller. What is that, a football stadium? The sun would have collapsed, everything. In fact, we even have stuff in the universe that does that. They're called neutron stars. So we know that it's possible to do that kind of collapsing. Gravity is what, in this case, is the grabber. It simply, grabs everything, and the electrons they're so pressured by the gravitational pressure of pushing things together, sucking things in by everything else that's involved, that the electrons get finally, they get swallowed up into the nuclei, and you get what are called neutron stars, which are very dense but very small. So we know that can happen in nature, but nevertheless, if atoms don't do that, and they don't seem to be doing that right now, here we are enjoying this lecture, or not, why not? What's keeping them out? And there's only one answer that physicists have been able to come up with, and that is, it's got something to do with that abstract space you were saying, Dr. Wolf. That's it, that space, that's something to do with that. We call it Hilbert space, or we call it probability field, a field of possibility, probability field. It's not actual, it's only probable. So here we have probability leading to stability, which is almost kind of oxymoronic in a way. The more probable things get, the more stable they seem to get, which is also kind of strange. So that atoms are not held together by fields of electrical force, that's only the groundwork, the framework for it. They're held together by fields of probability. But hold on. What the hell do you mean a field of probability? What is that? What is a field of probability? What can that mean? What is it? What is it? Probability is flip a coin, heads, tails, 50%, right? Probability. Probability is something that exists in the brains, the minds, the heads. What has it got to do with reality? What does it have to do with reality? And yet we are stuck, forced. Our equations are now filled with probability fields. We're not dealing with particles anymore. Quantum mechanics, quantum physics is the mathematical structure of fields of possibility. That's what we play with. That's what we can calculate. That's what nature tells us is going on. But we look out there and there seems to be hunks of matter. What the heck is going on? So we have come to the conclusion that everything is made of fields of possibility. But if that's the case, then everything is made of something called a mind. Because probability is an aspect of the mind. It's not an aspect of physicalness as we classically think about it. Now, the story goes on. If that's the case, what happens when an experiment is done and one tries to observe some aspect of atomic, molecular, subatomic, DNA, neural conduction, MRIs and what are we doing when we're doing these kinds of experiments? What are we doing? Well, what's happening is if we're getting pictures of anything at all, we're getting something which is now called in quantum physics an observer effect. The observer, by observing, is affecting what's being observed. Not only affecting what's being observed, but there are choices that the observer can make and different ways you can go about carrying out this observation. We call it the principle of complementarity. Tomorrow, I'm going to show you in a visual way how you do that. I'm going to show you an object. You're going to see it on a screen. You're going to watch it for a few minutes. And you're going to see it start changing when it's not changing at all. You'll see it change. It's not changing. You'll see it change. And you say, what's going on? And then I'm going to show you another way of seeing that thing where it'll just disappear right before your eyes. It's still going to be there, but you'll see it disappear right before your eyes. I won't change it, but you'll see it disappear right before your eyes. And you think, what's going on? All that's going on, all that's changing is your way of looking at things. And by changing the way you look at something, you actually change the object. This is an illusion that I would present to you tomorrow, or Saturday, but nevertheless, it illustrates what happens in the so-called quote-unquote real world, real world, real world, real world, real world. So these are the things that we can learn from understanding this type of thinking. So what we come to the conclusion then is that, well, if that's what's going on, if the observer is affecting reality, can we look at a map of the affectation of reality by a sequence of observations? Can we do that? And the answer is yeah. In fact, some students, I call them students of mine because I've been in this business now for 40 years, right? So when I wrote a book called Taking the Quantum Leap, which won the National Book Award back in 1981, 1982. Some students, they were young people. They're now working for the National Bureau of Standards and now other universities. They did some experiments. And later on, they credited me for having written the book, Taking the Quantum Leap, because it made them think about, what about these experiments? National Bureau of Standards and Technology at Boulder, Colorado. This is one of the highest laboratory facilities for doing research on the nature of time that's ever existed. These guys did the following experiment. They decided to look at about 5,000 beryllium atoms that were undergoing excitation by radio wave emission from sources, which normally would heat these atoms up. And then, after being heated up, they would, after getting enough heat from the radiant bath of heat, they would eventually emit light. They would de-excite. That's normal. And you can calculate how long that would take for a normal beryllium atom. It's like a quarter of a second, something like that. But these guys, and they can calculate everything that's going on. So these guys decided to do something. They decided that instead of just heating them up, they would look at the beryllium atoms during the heating process and see if just by constantly nudging them through looking, they could change the way these beryllium atoms absorbed heat. And guess what they found out? If you imagine that these little beryllium atoms are like little kettles of water heating up, watched pots never boil. They just didn't get hot as long as they were being observed. And they observed them for minutes. They never got hot. They stayed in their level ground state as if they were icebergs, just because they were constantly being observed. But they had to do this vigilantly. If they relaxed their vigilance so that they observed not as vigilantly, something like, if they observed 250 times in a quarter of a second, cut it down to 125 times, cut it down to 60 times, started cutting it down, they observed that a fraction of them would heat up. A fraction which corresponded to how much leeway time they had between these observations. And if they didn't observe them at all, they would all heat up in a quarter of a second and they would all radiate. So in other words, by vigilant observation, they were able to alter reality. This is 5,000 billion atoms. You might think, well, that's not so much. Well, first of all, it's a very difficult experiment to do. Quantum physics is a very delicate kind of science. It's very difficult to do. So, we know that observation, and now we're learning more. In fact, one of the most interesting areas that I'm getting into right now is an area of research that was invented by a couple of Israeli physicists who also invented a time machine, which I'll be talking about more on Saturday. But these Israeli physicists have come up with an idea that if you observe things weakly, that is, you don't really try to force it into saying yes or no, but you kind of constantly make it go, maybe, maybe, not really trying to make the atom either get hot or cold. Just observe it weakly. So, you're just not really causing a lot of disturbance. It turns out that under those circumstances, nature begins to show you a side that she has, which is so far out that we're still trying to figure out what it is we're seeing. I'll give you a hint. We are beginning to see, with this kind of exploration, something I will call negative existence. Now, let me tell you what that means. Positive existence would be things behaving themselves in the way that we normally see them behave. Negative existence, if we could see anything as that, would be things behaving themselves in exactly the opposite way they would behave themselves if they were in positive existence. For example, in positive existence, 2 plus charges repel. In negative existence, they attract. In positive existence, probabilities are numbers between 0 and 1. In negative existence, they're numbers between 0 and -1. Your mind goes, huh? What? Huh? And what we're seeing now is a whole realm of new forms of existence which completely transcends anything that makes any common sense to us at all. And these Israeli physicists have also come up with a way to invent a time machine which does something very different than the normal kind of science fiction time machines you think about. These time machines actually take you back in time or forward in time, and in so doing, you grow younger or grow older while the rest of the world just keeps going. What this allows you to do is you can go back in time to a time which is previous to where you are now, and which events in that backward time place could have led to where you are now, but what actually happened in the real world, so to speak, was that a different history, a different path took you to where you are now. This will take you to an alternative path. So for example, let's suppose that you got to where you are now through some painful relationship with some person. And you're okay now, but it was painful. This could take you back in time to a place where you could get to the same place without having to go through that pain. This could open up the door for new kinds of healing. Now you might think that sounds crazy. Maybe you think everything I'm saying sounds crazy. But what we're looking at right now is the complete malleability of time. That time is not what we have commonly expected and thought it to be, which is it's out there independent of us. It ain't out there independent of us. It's all being created constantly. And what makes us agree, or what makes us see time as the tick-tock on the wall, or the wristwatch I have there, is our common agreement and our accord with our bodily processes and the processes we see in nature, such as the rotation of the earth, or the movement of the stars, or anything like that, or the seasons. But we have accepted those as the only time there is. It's not the only time there is. There's many, many different kinds of time. And subjective time, we all know, can be different. What I'm talking about now is getting to the core of time itself, to see how, first of all, we can get objective time and why we have agreement about it and why it's okay, but also how we can ourselves change that, get out of that linear time, that's not the only time there is, get out of it into a new way of looking at time, to time travel, in other words. And I'll try to explain more about what that consists of. I won't have time tonight. In fact, we're reaching the end of this particular talk, so I'm going to take some time for questions in a moment. If we can map observations and see the effect on matter by observing when the observer gets into the game, then is it possible that through the ways we go about observing, we can change the order, the normal order of the evolution of what we're looking at? And the answer is yes. If something normally were to evolve, that is, get older, by going from A to B to C, is it possible that we could go from C to B to A? Can we find a way of carrying out some observations which allow us to relax that behavioral pattern which got us from A to B to C? What is the pattern that we normally consider to be the normal time order? And the answer turns out to be something that we all are familiar with, the development of skill and habit. That's how we normally cultivate our time. We know basically that we learn something, and as we learn something, we master it. And as we master it, we cut down on the possibilities of anything else happening. That's called mastery. And if we do that so well, it becomes habitual. Now that's what we do, and we all know we do that. We mastered various things, from learning, riding a bicycle, driving a car, learning to walk, for example. We learn all these things. We've mastered them. Now let me take you back to the beginning of time for a moment. It's popularly thought that the universe is on a skid into more and more chaos, and that things are getting worse rather than better. Nothing could be further from the truth. It ain't getting more chaotic, it's getting more ordered. And that is really bizarre, but why is that happening? Let's look at the evidence. In the beginning, there was a big bang. I can't think of anything more chaotic than a big bang. Can you? How is that ordered? What person in their right mind can see that as ordered? I can't. That's just chaos. Now suddenly, out of that chaos, that tohu and bohu of the Bible, out of that chaos, suddenly there comes things like light, radiation pattern, photons. Then suddenly out of that comes particles of matter, electrons, protons. Then comes hydrogen atoms, which are structures, which are definitely, a hydrogen atom is far more structured than a proton and an electron, because it's got a relationship. Relationships are structures. Out of that comes molecules. Out of that comes, movements, organized movements of patterns which are galactic in nature. Stars get formed, which start to give off radiation patterns and heat, blah, blah, blah. The whole blah, blah, blah goes. And look now where we are right now. We're now in a place where we have come into this picture. Those that conceive and perceive of this order. There's no way that that can happen without a process of making order. In other words, whatever is making this order, whatever you want to call it, consciousness, mind, whatever it is, the mind of God, however you want to talk about it, it's clearly making things fit a pattern that seems to be getting more ordered as we go on, not getting more chaotic. The universe is becoming, or appears to be, an act of creation in the same way that that is an act of creation, that the exit sign is an act of creation, that the painting of I guess that's the Buddha in the background is an act of creation, or this room is an act of creation by architects and builders. Same way. We're just making what we do in our everyday lives, which is a picture, a pattern of essentially the same thing. That whatever you want to call it, the Creator, God, whatever, it's part and parcel of it. And how does it do it? It does it, he does it, she does it, God does it, whatever you want to call it. You do it, I do it. The big eye in the sky does it, whatever you want to call it. You give it a name. And already you've distorted it by giving it a name, because now you've narrowed it into a picture of some sort, which is part of the creative process to make sense of the world, which is to create an illusion of God, whatever you want to do. Okay? That process, okay, takes place from our understanding of quantum physics through this process I just hinted out called focusing and defocusing. Focusing is taking what's chaotic and narrowing it down to something which is more or less, organized, and then as soon as you let go, it starts to relax again, and then you got to bring it back down again. Then you got to bring it back. It's something which goes through this fluctuation of trying to gain probability, maximize possibility to the mind focusing it down. And that is the logical order, the time order that we call going into the future. That's what we do. We're future-making machines, if you will. But the time reverse process would be going the other way, taking a habitual pattern that you have and opening it up for more possibilities. Now, I took you on a time travel trip in this room. You didn't even suspect I was doing it. When I said to you, give me 1/8 of a cup of your brain power and allow me to fill it with what I'm saying here and give up whatever you believe to be true for just a minute. Now I'm going to ask you to give up 1/2 a cup. If you can give the whole cup up, you'll be time traveling. God knows where you're going to go. You won't have to listen to me anymore. Because then you'll be in a whole different space, time, whatever. And you might think, well, that's nice to talk about, maybe, yeah, but I don't think I can do that. Can anybody do it, Dr. Wolf? Well, there's been a lot of people that have done it. We usually find them in India for some reason because they're not so dictated by what I call the desert religion syndrome. Desert religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The desert religion syndrome. You know what that is? You don't know? You don't know what that syndrome is? You should. It starts with God is going to smite you. Guilt is part of it. But even more, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to knock you for a loop. You either believe in me or I'll cut your head off. That's just not Islam. That's Christianity. That's Judaism. That's what I call the craziness of the desert religions, their vision of God. I know that sounds very anti-Christian. I'm not. I believe in the message of Christ. I believe in the message of Islam. I believe in the message of Christianity and of Judaism. I just don't believe in the vision of God that these religions portray to us. They're totally insane. They're nuts. They're crazy. And people believe those images and they get caught in the fear of God. What should we fear God? That makes no sense to me at all. But that's what we're caught in. Anyway, that's aside. You may already be, I don't like that. He's making fun of my religion. I'm not making fun of your religion. Okay. So this process, by relaxing it, going into this other place, people have done it. Avatars have done it. They've been noted through history. Buddha did it. Buddha talks about, oh yeah, I know all my past lives. I know all my future lives. How the hell could a guy sitting under a tree know all his past and future lives? And what the hell's going on there? Well, I'm telling you what's going on there. I'll tell you how he did it. He just began to see and expect this eye, this swinging door that he calls I. And he began to examine it more closely. And as he began to examine it, he even gave it techniques for how to examine it more closely. He wrote his whole, eightfold way. I mean, you got it down in writing, how to get through that if you want it. All the great teachers have told you how to do it. Okay. The most recent that I'm aware of, there are others that I'm becoming aware of that have been able to do it. One was named Maharshi Ramana, who was known to be in India between, I think, the first part of the 20th century. I think he died somewhere in the middle of that time. His visions and his ability to time travel were just enormous. People would come to see him, and he would tell them all about their lives without never having, just to sit with them, and their minds are like, to him, he sees what's going on. He tells them all about where they were, what their life was like, the park bench they sat on, whatever was in their minds was like an open door to him. Okay, so what I'm saying to you is, in brief, is that this thing of ours, this cosa nostra, this thing we call the life, our thing, okay, it's a journey, and it is truly awe-inspiring. Not because there's any great God that's going to strike us down, but because we, all of us, are beginning to realize who and what we are. Not just puppets, not just no accounts, not just egomaniacal big shots either, but something more important, a true sense of who we are. And that who we are is not something that can be labeled by anything really fixed or caught in the matrix of space and time. We are beyond space and time. We have been since the beginning, and we will continue to be that. So realize that we are in that is our journey. And you can do it by kind of forgetting for a moment who you think you are. Give me a little bit more from that eighth of a cup that you call your mind down to a half a cup if you can. And become, if you will, I'll give it a label, mind of God, if you will, or God itself. And that may sound pretentious, but it has become and it remains my everlasting faith. Thank you. Do we have time for some questions, or do you want to? I should not only you got to remind me to do this. When I start answering your question, say to me, "Repeat the question, Dr. Wolf." Just somebody yell that out to me in case I don't do it. Okay? Okay. Who's got questions? Can I just see who's got? I'm not going to call you. I just want to see how many hands I've got so I can handle them. Okay. Let's start in the back row. The guy with the glasses. You.
How much different is the Israeli time machine from standard hypnotic protocols of age regression or age progression?
The question is, how much different is the Israeli time machine from standard protocols of age regression that are done in psychological testing? It's very different because, first of all, it's a physical device that affects the possibility fields that make up a human being. The ingenuity of their device is that prior to them coming up with this, by the way, it's not going to be the easiest thing to make. It require some really big gravitational fields, but I'll talk more about that on Saturday. I don't want to get into that now. If we could build it, it would be something that anyone could enter, and every once in a while you'd be flipped, either at your choice, backwards or forwards in time, by an amount which you could pretty more or less predetermine. And you would either be younger or older accordingly. The age, in other words, physically, your probability fields would be altered, which would lead you to a change in your physical structure, one way or the other. Age regression is more or less, as I understand it anyway, a psychological procedure where the body doesn't really change. What I'm talking about in the Israeli time machine, time translation device, is something would actually affect you physically. Let's take you over here with the glasses. I'm calling on people with glasses first. Okay. Okay.
I wanted to share an experience that I had.
Can I cut you off? I just want to get questions first. If I have time, I'll take shared experiences, but I really would like to get questions because.
This is exemplifying.
Well, that's fine. I appreciate it. I really do. But there are people that have questions first. If you don't mind, people tell me about experiences. Sometimes it just goes, it's worth hearing. Come to the workshop and I'll give you ample time to talk about, okay? Yes, question.
Is our government involved with any of this stuff?
Is our government involved with any of this stuff? And by any of this stuff, I presume you mean the building of time machine devices. We are. Not just the government, but laboratories are pursuing time machine programs. Usually we have to work with small things first. We're not working with larger things. One of the interesting devices that are coming about now is something that's called quantum computers. You may have heard that terminology or read Scientific American about it. It's a very exciting field. Quantum computers open up not only new areas of possible technology and new areas of possible ways of understanding intelligence and possibly even how ego gets formed or how an I concept, because these machines would start doing what Hal used to do in 2001, become an identity of some sort. But they also involve parallel realities, parallel worlds. And as I'll explain on Saturday, it's in the parallel realities picture of quantum physics, which is essentially saying if the electrons are in different positions at the same time, how can that be? Well, each position is in a different universe that are overlapping like flimsies that are put one on top of each other. Then it leads to time machines, time travel, because you can always go backwards in time and end up in different universes so that you don't get any paradoxes coming into it. So it is being pursued. It's mostly theoretical, but there are some experiments now going on, and this work is going to go on. Okay, anybody else? Questions, please. Comments will save. Yes, you, please. Question.
I can follow this when we observe something like an electron or whatever, we change it.
Yes.
By observation. But what about like people?
Very good.
Like I know that my experience of another person.
Very good.
Is
perfect.
because of me. But what about the person?
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. When you observe electron, okay, Dr. Wolf, electron, that's a little tiny, that's a little booger. I mean, that's a small, but now what about a big thing like me, a big person? What about that? I mean, surely it's not, I'm not going to go bouncing around. No. Good. You're right. Big person ain't going to go bouncing around by your observation. But what is bouncing around is whether you are observing and how you go about that observing. So you're going to be changing your perception by these quantum mechanical processes, whether you like it or not. Now, my massive body may not change, but, there's only one mind present, two heads, one mind. So when you start changing or altering your perception of me by how you think and what you think, that affects me because my mind is resonant with it. So whether I may not articulate it just the way you did it, but I'll pick it up, and anybody will. That's called a relationship, and we all are in relationship. Because at the level of mind, the level of what's going on at that process, that I believe is just pure quantum mechanics. So that's where the observational effect is taking place. When you get to be good at this, and you can control the ability to focus and defocus even to the point where you're looking at big stuff like a body like me, then you start doing stuff like possibly the kind of stuff that Sai Baba in India does, where he manifests Buddhi and stuff like that from nothing. Whether he's doing that through magic or whether he's doing it by trickery or not, I don't know. But he's got pretty good mind power. He's got that kind of power. So what we're talking about here is not about the changing of a large, massive object, but we're talking about the changing of the perception of a large, massive object by the way you go about it. That's what I'm talking about. That's where I think this has an important aspect for psychological study and for human relationships and for sociological study. It's not, everybody thinks, well, if I observe it in a certain way, I can bounce it and make things happen and, I get power and control, make rockets go off. No, that's not what I'm interested in. That's not what we're dealing. We're looking at the ability we're looking at how observation affects reality at the submicroscopic level and how that affects things, we're looking at how that way of understanding reality can affect, and maybe, if nothing else, provide useful metaphors for how we go about engaging with each other. If nothing else, I think it's deeper than that, but if nothing else, that would be useful. Yes, yellow shirt.
And you meditate, and has this changed your experience of reality? Not the thinking part, but your experience of it.
Okay, the question is two parts. Do I meditate? And has it changed my perception of reality? Well, let me answer, first of all, do I meditate? I do meditate, but not necessarily the way it's popularly taught. I go into deeper phases of meditation in a kind of a process in which my writing comes through. That to me is a very deep meditation. Or any of my deeper thinking processes, particularly when I'm writing and new thinking is coming out, because I don't know what's going to appear in my fingers at all. To me, that's a kind of a meditation. It may not be to you. You know, meditation should be, well, empty your mind of everything. Well, my mind is pretty empty when this is happening. What's coming out is I've never seen before. So to me, that's part of it. Has it changed my perception of? Has it changed my first of all? Has it changed my perception of reality? Yes. Has it changed my reality? You betcha it has. Like gangbusters. I have completely changed my perception and my reality over a period of 30, 40 years. So much so that I've left family, I've left my job, I've left. I mean, if you were to meet my family, my sisters, and see what kind of family I grew up in, you couldn't believe that this is up here talking like this, because it just doesn't fit in that picture anymore. Because I'm just not that way anymore. I'm just not that person. I can see what that person was, but that person was, I see now, is my act at that time to get whatever I needed. But it ain't this act right now that gets that is trying to get or is doing what it needs to do in order to process what's new. So yes, everything's changed. Okay, yes. Two more. And then I have to go sign books. And Ruth Ann is going to take me to the bookstore. And if you want to, you can come down to the bookstore, buy a book, buy a book, buy a book. We got to make a living here, guys. Got to buy books. Okay, go buy a book. I'll be at the book. I'll sign your book for you. And you can then give me a little question if you want down there too. Okay, two more. Yes. Where does clairvoyance fit into this? Well, it fits in. It's part of the process. It's part of the process of seeing into the future. If I have time, I will show you how everybody is already clairvoyant, whether they like it or not. In fact, I'm going to show you I'm going to do another little experiment on the screen, which shows you how you are already exhibiting clairvoyance, even though you may not believe you are, because your mind is not. See, everybody thinks their mind is stuck at this thing called now, like it's that point, it's that place, that now. Then there comes another one now. Then comes another one now. Nothing can be further from the truth, because it's more like a window. Time is a window, and the width and shape of that window depends on something called what? Been listening? What would determine how big or how small that window would be? One word. It has only one syllable. I. Yay! Okay. Thank you. Last question up front.
What about weather? How would this relate to, say, rough, extreme weather patterns of tornadoes and frigid weather? Are we able to observe it such that we have power to make it less extreme?
Question is, what about weather? Are we able to make observations of weather in some way that would make it less extreme? I'm going to add more extreme. Well, this is funny. A good, interesting question. Is it possible that our ways of observation could affect weather? Well, according to the shamans that I studied with, and I went with several what are called shamans, although in Native American and Navajo and in the Dakota Sioux tribal people, they don't use the word shaman to describe what they do. They believe that they can affect the weather. In fact, if you go out to the Hopi lands, which are in the middle of where the Four Corners are in Arizona, you find these people living in what seems to be impossible situations on a high mesa and no water, and they're growing corn. I mean, come on, where's the water coming from? They grow corn. I mean, they're growing corn. And, you know, down low, you'd say, well, they're getting from that, but this is the high mesa. How are they getting water all the way up there? You know, and they have to do that through rain, and they have to get the rain. So the shaman has to do something, and they do things anyway. They believe they do it. But I want to say to you, I really, from the bottom of my heart, welcome you to come to hear me, and I'm very grateful that you came, and I truly appreciate you. Thank you very much.